Good morning, everyone. This is Mark Molina, CEO of Molina Leadership and Business Development Solutions. We are very grateful, thankful, and excited to have with us today Lane County Sheriff, Cliff Harrold. He's been a Deputy Sheriff, so that's not totally incorrect, but he is our elected sheriff at this time. Thank you for being here. I'm going to begin with reading his bio so that all of us who are listening who haven't had a chance to meet him yet will have a chance to know a little bit more about him. Sheriff Cliff Harrold has been part of the Lane County Deputy Sheriff's Office since 1990, when he joined the Law Enforcement Explorer post at the suggestion of a local Crestwell contract deputy. After his high school graduation, he stayed active in the Sheriff's Explorer post, worked as a 911 police, fire, EMS dispatcher for the Cottage Grove Police Department, and completed coursework to receive his Associate of Arts degree in Criminal Justice at Lane County Community College. He was hired into the Corrections Division as a deputy sheriff a few weeks after his 21st birthday. Cliff's work as a deputy includes experience in booking and housing operations in the Lane County Jail while assigned to the Corrections Division, as well as court transport, traffic safety team, main office patrol, field training officer, and SWAT operator in the Police Services Division. He was promoted to sergeant in 2004 and has served as a main office patrol supervisor, municipal contract sergeant, Marine Patrol sergeant, detective sergeant, and special response team sergeant. He has served as a lieutenant and special response team commander in the Police Services Division and at the rank of captain in both the Police Services and the Corrections Division. In July 2016, he was promoted to Chief Deputy. He graduated from the 276th session of the FBI National Academy, a 10-week program for law enforcement leaders across the nation and the world, where he took coursework in leadership, behavioral sciences, stress management, emotional intelligence, and fitness in law enforcement. Cliff is a member of the FBI National Academy Associates, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the Oregon State Sheriff's Association. Cliff has been married to his wife Becky for over 19 years and could not be more thankful for her endless support and encouragement. He has a son, Trevor, and a daughter, Mackenzie. Both are in high school. In his off time, Cliff enjoys many activities with his family, traveling and hiking with his wife, watching Trevor's high school soccer games, as well as working around his 5-acre property in the Crestwell area. Cliff served on the board of directors of Eugene Christian School for over 5 years and was president of the board for 3 years. He currently serves in a leadership role on the board of elders at University Fellowship Church of Eugene. Sheriff Harrold, thank you for being here today. I know that you have a lot on your plate, and I appreciate the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation.
Very good. So really, I would like to just ask some general questions. I have a little bit more than general questions, but for those that might not necessarily understand how the sheriff office is set up and some of the challenges, I'd like to just begin with some of the formation of the sheriff's office as it stands today. Now, how many employees are there at the Lane County Sheriff's Office currently?
Total about 300 or a little over 300 employees, and a little over 200 of those are sworn deputy sheriff employees.
And those that are not sworn, are they all admin positions?
So we would have police records officers who receive and file police reports. We would have jail records officers who are engaged in the booking and release of folks over at the jail. We would have fiscal staff and dispatchers, stores clerks who make sure that the jail has enough toilet paper and all the supplies that the jail needs to run. And I'm sure I'm leaving out a few other property and evidence technician, radio network. And so all of those support type services that really are so integral to the business. If we didn't have them, deputies wouldn't be able to do the things deputies do.
So the deputies that work with the inmates, they're part of your sworn officer detail.
That's correct.
Or ranks. Okay.
Yep.
And how many divisions are there in the Lane County Deputy Sheriff's Office or Sheriff's Office?
Yeah, so technically, if you look at budget documents, we have 4 divisions, and internally, we oftentimes forget about the fourth division. We think about three main working divisions, and I'll explain that. But primarily, so we have the corrections division, which is our largest division, doing the function. The sheriff, of course, each sheriff in Oregon is mandated to provide a jail. And then we have the police services division. So that's the portion of our office that provides a police service to anybody who lives outside of a city that has its own police department. So roughly 110,000 people who rely on the sheriff's office if they were to call 911 and need a police response, rely on the sheriff's office to provide that. And then we have our administrative division, and we've talked about renaming that from administrative to support services division. We haven't actually gotten around to doing it, but the administrative division houses all those folks that we just talked about, records officers in both the jail and police records, fiscal operations so that people can get paychecks and so that we can pay our bills and administer the grant monies that come in and out of the office, and all of those support functions are in the administrative division. So those are the three main divisions. The fourth division that's listed in the budget is actually called the Office of the Sheriff, and it's a division of one. it's the position and the office that I am in.
Now, you said each sheriff is mandated to provide these certain services. So is that mandated by the state constitution?
Yeah, so one of the things that's sort of interesting and unique about the position of sheriff is it's the only elected law enforcement position. And so the history goes way back. In fact, there was a Lane County sheriff before Oregon was a state.
Interesting.
And then through the Constitution and state statute, the sheriff is assigned responsibilities. And so the sheriff shall maintain a jail. The sheriff shall serve the circuit courts in the county. The sheriff shall serve court paperwork. So, for example, people don't necessarily think about it, but any protective orders that are issued by the Lane County Circuit Court, those are served by deputy sheriffs. And so it doesn't matter if they're served inside the city of Eugene or down in Cottage Grove or out in the county, a deputy sheriff serves those papers. And so those are all responsibilities that are assigned by statute to the sheriff, the person who occupies the office of sheriff for each county. And then there's a statute that says, oh, and sheriff, you can deputize people to help you get your work done. And so the relationship and the authority for deputy sheriffs is one where I'm given authority to swear them in as deputy sheriffs, and then they go out and fulfill responsibilities that have been assigned to me. So it's a little bit different than other types of law enforcement where, for example, a municipal police officer's authority comes from usually a city charter that says that they're going to have a police department and that police officers do X. Whereas a deputy sheriff's authority comes through me deputizing them to do the work that's assigned to me. So it's a little more direct relationship. And I had the privilege of swearing in 2 new deputies this morning, probably be the highlight of my week. And we talked a little bit about that direct relationship, the sheriff to the people, because it's an elected position. And so the community has access to their elected sheriff. And then from the sheriff to the deputy sheriffs who are doing work in my name and in my authority.
And so, what is the relationship between your position and, say, the county board of commission? Because you're elected,
right?
So, what is your relationship with the county commissioners? The DA's office. How does that all? Who has a? I know that you're elected, but what does the authority, accountability in those positions look like?
Yeah, so ultimately the position of sheriff is accountable to the voters, to the people of the community. So the Board of Commissioners don't have authority over the sheriff. The commissioners are elected by their district, and the sheriff is elected throughout the county, much like the district attorney is. But the commissioners obviously do have authority with respect to revenues within the county and the budget. And so the budget process is through a budget committee initially and then approved by the Board of County Commissioners. And so when you think, again, I guess I'll go back to sort of a comparison with a municipal organization. Generally, there's a city manager or city administrator that reports to the council, and then each department head would work for the city manager. So the public works director works for the city manager, the police chief works for the city manager, etc. In county government, it's a little bit different in that many of the county department heads work for the county administrative officer, which is Steve Mokrahysky. But three of us don't work for Steve, and that would be myself and the district attorney and the assessor, Mike Coles. Because our positions are elected, we don't work for the county administrator, we work for the people who elect us. But we have terrific relationships regardless of sort of that, that structure of who has authority over who. We have really good relationships here in Lane County with department directors, whether they're elected directors or appointed directors. We've got a great relationship with County Administrative Officer Steve Mokrahysky, and I work to have good relationship with the county commissioners because I want them to be informed about what is going on in their county, in their sheriff's office.
I appreciate that detail because, you know, most of the citizens like myself, unless they're highly involved in the area of politics, this construct, most of us don't know. So I'm kind of surprised to hear all of that. Being a former soldier, I'm thinking, you know, everybody answers to the county commissioners, you know, that mindset, but I appreciate that detail. You know, when I got out of the Army in 1995, the Lane County Sheriff's Department was really big. Had a lot of different areas of service, and, incarceration facilities. Then we started losing, not people, but the state started losing timber monies and all of that. How many facilities do you manage now, whether it's incarceration or otherwise?
Yeah, so we have the Lane County Jail at 101 West 5th, which is the main housing operation within Lane County. And then next door, we have the Community Corrections Center, and we operate a program out of the Community Corrections Center. It's sort of multifaceted, but it's a transition center. And so one part of that program is a contract relationship with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So when individuals are being released from federal prison to the local area, because this is the area they came from, they will be released to the building next to the jail, and deputy sheriffs will be there to help them as they transition from an institutional life to a non-institutional life. And so while they're living there, they can fill out a request for a pass so that they can go to a family birthday party. But they have to say, here's where I'll be and here's when I'll be back. They can go out and do job searching. They can receive counseling. They can leave the facility and go to counseling or to other programs like what are offered at sponsors, etc. So we have that part of the program is funded with a contract relationship with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We have another program that is in relationship with state prisons, and it's a relationship that has grown through the local Public Safety Coordinating Council. Public Safety Coordinating Council is a robust structure with folks, representatives from the Public Defender's Office, the DA's office, sponsors as a reentry service, public health, behavioral health, and on and on. And we get together on a regular basis because the system is so intertwined, right? I mean, it really has to work as a system. If one part of the system is out of joint, it impacts the rest of the system. So we have a relationship because of that with state prisons for similar work, and it's called the RLAN program, which is Release Lane County. And so it's folks who are getting out of state prison, and again, it's an opportunity to help them hopefully successfully transition from state prison to our facility, which is still structured, but it's not as structured as being in prison, and we have reach in helping supports, and then they transition from our facility over to sponsors. Okay. So that those are the two main things that happen next door to the jail at the CCC. We no longer, unfortunately, have a forest work camp. When I was earlier in my career, I didn't personally ever work out at the forest work camp, but had the privilege of working with a lot of deputies that did. And I've also had the opportunity to visit with a lot of folks who served some time out at the forest work camp. And oftentimes folks will reflect, folks who worked out there as part of their incarceration will talk about what a pivotal time it was in their lives when they went out and they experienced a different relationship with the deputies who were working out there because they were working together. They had a common purpose, a common goal. They felt a lot of satisfaction at the end of the day because they had worked, and then they were they were rewarded as well because the living environment was a much more enjoyable environment than being in jail. Um, and I got the chance to watch deputies who later came to patrol, and I was working patrol, and they would encounter somebody who they had worked with out at the forced work camp, and there was a relationship there. And and every time that relationship was super beneficial to whatever situation had caused us to have that encounter in that moment. The fact that they had this previous relationship that was built out at the forced work camp, every time I saw that being really valuable and successfully resolving situations.
Now, in the arena where from those transitioning from the Federal Bureau of Prisons to the CCC, what kind of services are offered to them within that framework?
Yeah, so I'm not super able to go into specifics about that. I've not actually worked in that program. I'm involved in the meetings when we talk about whether or not we can afford to continue the program, but I do know that we've had folks available to help them with resume building and preparing to search for a job. And the deputies will really, and again, the deputies in that facility have a different relationship than in the housing area, where they're really trying to coach them about this transition from being in an institution with very, very strict guidelines and not very much, what am I trying to say? Not very much responsibility for caring for oneself, right? I mean, in the institution, you're fed, you're given clean clothes. There's a lot of that's already happening. And so there's a lot of coaching that goes into, hey, now that you have freedom, let me help you try and make good choices so that during this flip of a switch transition, you don't, hopefully you don't make similar mistakes to what just sent you into the institution in the first place.
And so you have also the Heartland program. Are there any civilians or non-law enforcement, non-legal services outside of sponsors that's involved within that committee or the framework of that service area?
And again, I don't feel very prepared to be able to speak to the detail of that program. I know we've got folks that are plugged into things like the Veterans Treatment Court, and so I know that we have staff that show up over at Veterans Treatment Court. We interact extensively with all of the circuit court treatment courts. So they have the drug treatment court that's been around in Lane County for a long, long time. We have the Veterans Treatment Court. We have the mental health court. And we're very connected with the court, the jail system, to try and bring all of that together for optimal resolutions through the treatment court system. We're also very connected because we the sheriff's office, are the fiduciary agent for the grant dollars that help fund those treatment courts. And that kind of gets back to our budget, which of course is available online. People can take a look at it, but it really needs some interpreting because a lot of dollars that are represented in our budget are actually us being a fiduciary agent for other organizations. So the treatment court dollars are grant dollars that come through our organization that then go back to the treatment courts, but it makes them, it's included in the sheriff's budget, but it's just because it flows through us, we administer the grant. We do that for our communications network, which is a shared system with Lane County, Eugene, Springfield, eWeb, a number of different partners. We're the fiduciary agent for that system, so those dollars come through here. And then we have additional network system that's called the Southwest 7 County system, and again, we're the fiduciary agent for that. So those are some pretty expensive capital expenses to run a network system. Those are assets that are worth a lot of money, and then also the equipment that has to be purchased and maintained and whatnot is pretty expensive. And so again, that sort of inflates, when you look at our budget, that inflates our budget numbers when those aren't actually dollars that are being used to provide the service direct to Lane County.
What is the Southwest 7?
So the history of that goes back far enough before I was even in administration and very plugged in, but it was a project that initially there were some dollars from the federal government post 9/11 to provide a more interoperable radio network for 7 counties in Oregon. And so it was dubbed the Southwest 7 region. But the reality is there's currently only 3 counties participating. There's only ever been a total of 3 counties participating in the system, and that is Lane County, Lynn County, and Benton County. But we've never dropped the name Southwest 7. The other counties are still available if they chose to come onto the system. The infrastructure is available to them, but there are also costs with coming on to the radio system. And so primarily right now, it's a relationship between us, Lynn County, and Benton County.
And so I'm not sure if I missed it, but so how many facilities in total does your office manage?
Well, I would say when I hear facilities, I think corrections facilities, and I would say there's the two. There's the main jail and next door the CCC. You could technically say that the front part of the jail, which we sometimes call the DOMC, sometimes we call it the Sherman Center. You could maybe say that's a different facility. It technically has a different address, but it looks like it's part of the jail. It's brick, just like the jail. What goes on in there is a lot of the alternative programs. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when folks are serving a sentence and they're going to do it by coming in and working on sheriff's work crew. So they're actually not in custody in the main jail. They report on a Wednesday for their shift because that's what works best for their work schedule or whatever. So they report to the DOMC. They go out on a truck with a deputy for the day. They come in, clean up, and go home. And that is a day taken off of their sentence. Also in the DOMC, we have folks that let's say maybe they have some physical limitations and so they're unable to work on the sheriff's work crew, but we can still allow them to serve out their sentence by reporting to the DOMC, day reporting. And instead of going out on a truck, they'll spend the day in a cell in the DOMC, and then at night they'll leave, and that'll count as a day served to their sentence. We also have community service appointments, and so sometimes people will get sentenced to do community service, and we have a deputy that establishes relationships with a lot of nonprofit organizations. And so folks who have gotten a court sentence will come check in with him, and he'll try and connect them with a nonprofit to serve their sentence. We also have deputies over there that work in population management. And so their job is to review the in-custody population. We have a whole lot of court requirements on the way that we manage our population and the way that we afford them opportunities to earn greater privileges within the facility. And so we have what's called a classification program. And so deputies have to review the behavior of the in-custody population periodically to make sure that they're properly classified. So a minimum status inmate has more privileges than a maximum status inmate. And so the property management deputies review those things. They're housed in the DOMC. Yeah, I think that's most of what we have going on in that facility. Of course, we have the courthouse, and one of those things I mentioned at the top of the interview, one of the things that the sheriff is mandated to do is to serve the circuit courts. And so we're responsible to respond into the courts, both to take in custody folks to their court appearances, but also if an out of custody individual comes into court and the judge determines that they are to be taken into custody, then that's our responsibility. The judge will call and a sheriff's deputy will go and do that. And so we have responsibilities for the courthouse, but I wouldn't say necessarily we're responsible for the whole facility. We're responsible for some functions within it.
What's it like what's it like to have a high profile inmate? For instance, I was just out of the Army when Kip Kinkle committed his crimes at Thurston High School. What kind of reaction or internal operation changes does your office take into consideration for high profile inmates?
Yeah, we'll do an analysis as far as any security threats or concerns that causes us. And through the years, we've improved mechanically our security for the facility. So a lot of times folks will see if, we're talking about Kip Kinkle, if there's some sort of news thing that mentions him, you'll see a video of him being escorted by deputies to a court hearing. And so that where that video was shot, we've restructured that mechanically so that those sorts of things are now protected by, there's some metal gates that we can close and a curtain we can pull. And we've taken some of those responses within what's rather an old building. We still do believe that the security concerns we have today are much different than when this courthouse was built. And there are still some things that just mechanically we can't change about this building. And so we do keep those in mind when we're dealing with particularly a high profile case. It may require some additional staffing from us during the course of the case. A lot of it just depends on, sort of what kind of attention the case is getting and whether or not we need to make any special accommodations. And we work real closely with the courts too. Ultimately, when a trial is going, the trial court judge has tremendous authority to decide what actions should or should not be taken, particularly regarding security in the courtroom or coming to and from. And so we work real closely with the judge to make sure that we're working in accordance with their desires. Sometimes they'll ask us for recommendations. And so again, I'll go back to relationships. It sure makes work a lot easier to be accomplished if you have good relationships and good communication. And personally, I think that our organization really prides itself on relationships and relationship building. It's part of our culture. One of the things that you'll frequently hear us talk about is that relationships are primary, everything else is secondary. And so that's something that's been a focus of emphasis for as long as I've been around the office, and we're going to keep doing that.
What is the budget for the sheriff's office?
Yeah, so the proposed budget for this next fiscal year, which starts tomorrow, the total budget is $63,875,689. How that breaks up is about $34.8 million is for the corrections function of the office. And again, that's the biggest portion of our office is the corrections function. The police division budget is about $13.8 million. And then the administrative division is about $14.8 million. And then I'll remind us again, that administrative budget is again where the grant dollars, a lot of the grant dollars, not all of them, but a lot of the grant dollars come through. It's where our capital expenses are for radio network, for fleet. We have about $2 million expense per year for fleet costs. So a lot of those things live in the administrative division rather than it being a personnel expense. So.
Well, I served as, for a while, I was a mentor in the Veterans Court. And then I was coming in when I was pastoring to do Spanish-speaking Bible studies during the week. And I know there's a lot of community volunteers that participate in the process for the county. And that's very encouraging. What are your thoughts around that?
Oh my goodness, we couldn't accomplish nearly what this office is able to get done if we didn't have literally hundreds of volunteers helping us out. We have a tremendous amount of volunteers, as you mentioned, and you were one of, working inside the facility to help us deliver services to the adults in custody there. And then our search and rescue program, which I haven't mentioned search and rescue yet, but that's another function that's assigned to the sheriff of each county by state statute. And we only have 2 paid employees for the search and rescue function here in Lane County, about 4,600 square miles. And I think folks know tremendous outdoor recreation opportunities here in Lane County. We go from the ocean to the mountains. And those 2 FTE, they're sworn special deputies, they marshal a couple hundred volunteers in a number of different specialty areas like Eugene Mountain Rescue or Adult SAR, or we have the Explorer Post, young people who are interested in search and rescue. We have a team of folks who will come in with their 4x4 vehicles to drive some of the roads if we have a lost subject out in the roads. We have the mounted posse who will come in and assist with searches. So it's been, really an honor for me. I've been around the office for about 30 years. My first 5 years were as a volunteer. And so the interactivity, again, with the help of volunteers from the community is tremendous. They do a tremendous amount of work. And then they add so much to our culture as an organization as well, to have them coming in and working side by side with us. Again, I really appreciate how that is a piece of the culture of this office.
Oh, yes, over the years here in where I live in Springfield, I met several people because I also was a Cub master and Scout master and football and soccer coach over the years. And in those circles, I always met someone who was a volunteer for search and rescue, either with their boats or their diving equipment or their horses. I never really understood how broad the expanse of volunteers were until I started meeting these individuals.
Yeah, and those folks, here they are volunteering their time, and they work so hard, just time after time. So impressed with their willingness to drop everything they have going on at home and respond in for a really long hike, or maybe even an overnight, to get somebody out of one of the many different recreational opportunities we have. Or, yeah, I spent a couple years as the detective sergeant, and we've got a pretty small detective team for the Lane County Sheriff's Office. We only have 4 detectives. Primarily, we work on violent crimes, so homicides and crimes against children. We don't have any detective ability for property crimes. We don't have burglary detectives or anything like that. As a detective sergeant, more than once I had the opportunity to ask search and rescue to come out and do a grid search for evidence. And these folks, they're really good at it. They go to training. They're meticulous, and you couldn't ask for more as an investigator or the lead supervisor for an investigative team, and you're needing a piece of evidence that may make the difference in a homicide case. And you have these volunteers come out, and they're just meticulous, hardworking folks who show up to serve in a volunteer capacity, and super appreciate them.
Very good. Talk to us a little bit about your patrol division. How many square miles and how many patrol officers do you have on shift at any one time?
Yeah, so depending on which Google search you pay attention to, we're somewhere in the area of 4,600 square miles, so roughly the size of the state of Connecticut. And currently we have 25 budgeted positions for deputy sheriffs to respond outside in unincorporated Lane County to respond to police service calls. So 25 deputy sheriff positions and then 6 supervisors. So that for a 24/7 operation typically means we have 3 deputies on duty and 1 sergeant on duty for the rural areas. Between 2008 and 2012, the sheriff's office lost 200 positions to budget cuts, and we laid off 100 people. And while we have been able to recover some of those positions because of the public safety levy that supports the jail operation, it really has not helped us improve the situation out on patrol. So earlier in my career, we had a very robust traffic safety team, and that was one of my assignments that I held. And we no longer have that capacity. So one thing to keep in mind is when I'm talking about the 25 budgeted positions, those are county general fund positions to respond to county calls for service. We do have other deputy sheriffs that are driving around in cars, which are contract deputies. And so when I mentioned the police services division of 13.8 million, some of that 13.8 million is actually revenue from folks who contract with us to provide a police certified deputy. As an example of that is our long relationship with both the city of Cresswell and the city of Veneta. Both of those cities, instead of having their own police department, they contract with the sheriff's office to provide police within their city. So, for example, the city of Cresswell now contracts for 4 full-time deputies and 1 full-time sergeant to be their municipal policing agency. And so those deputies literally are assigned to work inside the city limits of Cresswell. We can't send them to a burglary call up McKenzie Highway because the city of Cresswell is paying for that resource and they expect it to work in their city. Now, we can grab that deputy and send him to an emergency, just like in an emergency, the Cottage Grove Police Department will drive all the way up Route River Road to help us out. So we do still have that sort of relationship. You might see a Cresswell deputy out. Their cars are marked sheriff, and then it says Cresswell on the car. So somebody might say, well, it's this Cresswell deputy doing up McKenzie Highway, for an example. Well, it could be an overtime assignment. They maybe came in on a day off to help cover an overtime shift on main office, and that's their assigned car, so they're still going to drive it. Or it might have been, there could be reasons why that happens. But I was talking about contract deputies. So both Cresswell and Veneta pay for 4 full-time deputies. And then we have a contract relationship with the Oregon State Marine Board. The State Marine Board collects revenue through the registration and licensing of boats within the state of Oregon. And then they use that pot of revenue and they contract with each of the sheriff's offices to provide marine law enforcement in their county. So currently the Marine Board pays us to have 3 full-time deputies for marine law enforcement on the many different lakes and rivers within Lane County. We also have a contract relationship with the Federal Bureau of Land Management. They pay for 2 full-time deputies to help provide police services on BLM lands. So think Shotgun Creek, McGowan Creek out in Marcola, or out in the Horton area. There's a number of different areas where BLM lands are a very popular recreational opportunity. And so the BLM pays so that we can have a couple deputies available to deal with calls in those areas. We have a contract relationship with Oregon State Parks to provide our dunes patrol deputies. So the Oregon dunes are very popular to ATV and off-highway vehicle use. And Florence, Oregon dunes in particular are a draw. In fact, you'll see a ton of state of Washington license plates coming into Florence for a good weekend of dune riding. A lot of activity out there, and frankly, we wouldn't have the ability to address it without a contracted deputy to be out there. So we do have one position that's contracted that way. And then we also have a contracted position with Lane County Roads to do motor carrier enforcement. So that's the deputy that focuses on truck safety and whether or not trucks are overloaded and potentially damaging the roadways.
Now, how do you as a sheriff manage all of these contracted employees in regards to making sure they have the right kind of training, the right kind of attitude, the right kind of mechanisms and support in those extended areas?
Yeah, so contract assignments are sort of the life of a deputy in Lane County. And this is sort of unique to Lane County. It's something that I have really grown to appreciate during my career here, and in particular in my position as sheriff in the times that we're in right now, is that we hire deputy sheriffs into the jail, with few exceptions. When a deputy sheriff gets hired, they go to work in the jail. Some people don't choose to apply with our organization because they're really picturing being out driving around in a police car and they don't want to work in a jail. And I understand that. I meet individually with everybody that wants to come to work here as a deputy. And I ask them how they're feeling about starting in the jail, and then I explain to them why that's so important to us. We are convinced that it contributes to the culture of our organization in the way that we treat the community and the way that we communicate with the community. And the best way that I try to explain it to the new folks that we're about to hire is that we're going to hire them. We're going to invest training in them. Within the first couple of weeks, they're going to be going to training about professionalism and respectful communication. They're going to be going to de-escalation training. We're going to be talking to them about all those things. And then they're going to go with a field training officer in the jail facility. Mm-hmm. They're going to have the opportunity, not only during the time they're with their field training officer, but then once they get signed off in solo and they're still working in the jail, they're going to get the opportunity to observe communication from other deputies. And they're going to get the chance to say, oh, wow, that technique really worked to convince this adult in custody who wasn't following the rules to decide to follow the rules. Or maybe they're going to get the opportunity to say, oh, that technique did not work. Mm-hmm. And subconsciously, they're going to be building their own toolkit with how to do that, because their shift is going to be the shift is going to be 8 hours of trying to convince folks to follow the rules. When you train somebody out on patrol, you're with a field training officer and you have the opportunity to watch your field training officer encounter somebody and have communication with them. But then after, let's say 15 weeks of field training officer, you're going to be out driving around in your own car. And the interaction on the street, sort of, you're wearing your uniform, which represents authority, and you have an interaction with somebody on the street that's maybe a 5-minute interaction, and you need them to do something that you want them to do. That is so different than spending an 8-hour shift in the jail trying to convince somebody to follow the rules. And then not only is it that 8-hour shift, but you're going to go home and you're going to come back and the same, oftentimes the same person is going to be there and you're going to spend another 8 hours trying to convince them to follow the rules. And so sometimes on the patrol side, the solution is make an arrest, put them in handcuffs and take them to jail, and then you're done. Go do your paperwork. But the situation is over. In the jail, you can't just solve every situation by putting them in jail. They're already in jail. So we think that, the fact that by the time you get to patrol, you've usually been a deputy for at least 1 year, maybe a couple, sometimes 5 or 6. So you've built those communication skills sort of unknowingly while you're working inside the jail, and then you come out to patrol and you just interact with folks differently. You have different abilities to communicate. And I don't say that to, what I look at that is that's a unique opportunity our organization has that not all police agencies have, because they don't run a jail. So they don't have the chance to give their people that opportunity. We're super glad that we do have the opportunity to do that. And we believe that we're seeing on a regular basis that it's part of our culture. It's part of the way that we interact with the community we serve. And, that's pretty important, especially for county deputy sheriffs. In a city, you can have that encounter on the street, and if it's not going well, if somebody isn't agreeing to do what you want, usually you can get some more people dressed like you there in fairly short period of time. And perhaps with enough of those people dressed similar to you, you can get the person to do what you want. Out in the county, we've got 3 deputies that are crisscrossing 4,600 square miles. They put on a regular basis 200 miles a shift on their car. And so if you're having an encounter up Row River Road and you're trying to convince somebody to do what you want them to do, you might be trying to convince them for a while before very many people dressed like you show up. So it's a pretty important skill. And we're thankful that we have the opportunity to give people the opportunity to grow in that way before they come out to patrol. And then to finally getting to what you actually asked me about those contract deputies are chosen from amongst the folks that have come over to patrol and have been trained in doing that. And so we're confident when we assign somebody out to the Bonita contract, we've trained them. They've had the opportunity to practice those skills, to grow in their skills. And then, on any given shift, I mentioned Cresswell pays for 4 full-time deputies and a full-time sergeant. So the deputies working in Cresswell, they work for that Cresswell sergeant. But if the Cresswell sergeant isn't on duty, we have a sergeant on duty, right? And so if the Cresswell deputy needs something, their sergeant's gone home for the night, the shift supervisor sergeant's available. And so that supervision, that resource, the mentoring, coaching, all of that's going to be available to them because they've contracted with an organization that has somebody available 24/7.
What is your view? How do you feel that the diversity of the sheriff's office, the sheriff department, how do you feel that's going, and what does that look like to you? Anything specific as you recruit that you're looking for these days?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question. It's super relevant all the time, but right now especially. One of the things that I've reflected on is the fact that I have frankly, a pretty limited life experience. I've been a part of this office for 30 years. I was born in Lane County. And obviously, I think we all know Lane County doesn't have a huge amount of diversity within it. I did get the opportunity to go to the FBI Academy, as you mentioned in my bio, and spent 10 weeks with peers from across the nation and actually from across the world, talking about relevant issues in law enforcement. And then hearing different perspectives because all of us work in different subcultures, right? Mm-hmm. So here in Lane County, we work hard to recruit a diverse workforce. But one of the things that I recently sort of realized, I was at an 8-hour implicit bias training, and I was trying to think through what that means. And I recognized that a lot of folks who know me, who have had the opportunity to visit with me, know that I am anxious to recruit good people to come to work here. And so if somebody says, hey, my cousin John or somebody that I know is kind of interested in law enforcement, I'm usually quick to say, hey, I'd love to meet him for coffee. And I'll talk to him about the career, and I'll talk to him about my organization, and I'll try and convince them that if this is what they want to do, they should work for us, not somewhere else. And so people who are around me know that I'm willing to do that. What I realized at this training is, maybe there's other people that if they knew I was willing to do that, I could reach out more, and maybe that would be a more diverse pool. One of the things that I did was I have a connection with this organization that's called One Hope in Lane County. Mm-hmm. It's a group of folks that sort of umbrella organization over a bunch of churches in Lane County. And I was aware through that organization that there's a subgroup called Una Esperanza, mm-hmm. which is several Spanish-speaking pastors. Mm-hmm. And so previously, shortly after I was appointed to sheriff, I had reached out to say, hey, I'd love to meet with these pastors so that they can ask me directly questions about concerns their community has at the time, particularly about immigration. I'd had the opportunity to have a lot of people tell me that the community was afraid of us. And I wanted to interact with that more personally, not just hear it in meetings And so I got the chance to meet with these pastors. Most of them are Spanish speaking only. So we had a translated conversation where they could ask me direct questions about what's the sheriff's role with respect to immigration, and what about when the community sees this and it causes them concern, they think that it's this, you know. Anyway, it was a terrific conversation, and I really appreciated getting to visit with them. So what I did after this implicit bias training was I reached out to say, hey, folks who know me know that I'm willing to meet with people who are maybe interested in law enforcement. I would love you all, Spanish pastors, if there's anybody in your community that you think might be interested in law enforcement as a career, I would love to meet with them for coffee. I'd love to visit with them about the job. So that's one step that I've taken to try to reach out and make sure that I'm recruiting from all the different communities in Lake County. And I want to continue that work. We also are frequently in a position of needing to recruit for female staff in particular. One of the reasons why the sheriff's office is, and sometimes you'll see, if you're looking at recruiting bulletins for law enforcement, occasionally a sheriff's office will recruit for female applicants only, which, as we all know with EOC, that's a pretty big deal to advertise a job, but you have to be a female to apply. But there are requirements when you're running an institution, an incarceration institution. There are requirements for female staffing. We're required to provide female deputy sheriff staffing for some of the job responsibilities within the facility. And so we've done some things like we've sent some of our staff to a Fair of the Heart, or some of those other locations where we can maybe have some conversations with women who may be interested or maybe never thought about a career field as a deputy sheriff, and so we can talk to them about maybe what they thought a career as a deputy was, and what's true about being a deputy here in Lane County. So those are some of the efforts we've done. Always could do better, for sure. I had a conversation earlier this week, as actually the end of last week. A young woman had reached out to me, a young Black woman, and she wanted to talk to me a little bit about what's going on across the nation, and asked me some questions about the sheriff's office. So we met for a cup of coffee over at Full City and visited, and I told her the same thing. I said, hey, if there's anybody that you know in your connections, in your circle of influence, in your community that you think is interested in law enforcement, connect me. I'd love to meet him for coffee. I'd love to talk to him. So those are some of the efforts that we've made, but like I said, we can always do better. And if you have any ideas, Mark, or if anybody that's listening have any ideas, I want them to know I'm open, and I'd love the opportunity to visit with folks.
I appreciate that. I know that you really can only recruit from the pool of applicants that applies, and it can be challenging in this particular region for diversity, and that's just a reality. Let's talk about, we have just a few minutes left. What do you do? How do you handle? What are your internal processes if you receive any complaints about a deputy sheriff for any reason? For any reason.
Yeah.
How does your office process those types of issues?
Yeah. So we have a policy that says that any employee of this office who receives a complaint will take a complaint. And so that can come by phone or email. We have a portal on our website that people can click and send, and every one of those will be looked into. Mm-hmm. The process will start once we identify, which function of the office the complaint is about, whether it could be a complaint about our dispatch center, and so it would be assigned to the manager of the dispatch center. Could be about a law enforcement response on the police side, or could be a search and rescue thing, etc. So we receive it, we assign it to the proper manager, and they do an initial inquiry, and then they make a determination, or a recommendation, I should say. They make a recommendation. Should we assign this to the Office of Professional Standards? So we have a sergeant. It's a full-time position, and he works in the Office of Professional Standards. And so he is trained to do internal investigations, and then he also does policy review as part of his regular duties. So the manager can say, I recommend that this go to a full investigation. The reasons why we would do that is that we do have most of our workforce are represented by a union. And so when we take on an investigation that may result in discipline, we need to make sure we're following all the rules of the bargaining agreement with the union. And so that's why we have a full-time employee who's a specialist in that. So they'll make the recommendation, and it goes up the chain of command. So a sergeant could take the initial complaint. They could write it up and send it to the lieutenant and say, I think we should send this off the professional standards. Or they could write it up and say, I called the complainant, I talked to him, and actually there was a misunderstanding. Either way, they're going to write it all up and document it. Then the lieutenant either says, yep, I agree with this recommendation, send it on, or the lieutenant can change the recommendation. Then it goes to the captain, who can agree or change. Then it goes to the chief deputy, the number 2 in the office, and then he can either agree, assign it out, or he can agree that it actually doesn't need to be assigned out. So that's how that works. I will caveat that when somebody is in custody and they have a complaint, there's a grievance process, and that's actually prescribed by case law through federal case law. There's a grievance process where an inmate can request to fill out a grievance, and it's similar but slightly different in the way it gets reviewed, but it is reviewed at multiple levels.
When I was on the police planning task force here in the city of Springfield, it's been a few years now, and Chief Jerry Smith was chief at that time, but when there were complaints, he would send the complaints out to the Oregon State Police to be investigated. Who would you, if you needed to go assigned out? What does assigned out mean, and who gets involved in that?
Yeah, so there are circumstances where the best idea is to have a different law enforcement agency investigate a complaint if it looks like it might be a criminal complaint. So if we receive a complaint and there's it appears that there's an allegation that somebody in the office committed a crime, then we might ask somebody else to do that. I've been in a position where I've called up the Clackamas County Sheriff and said, hey, Sheriff, I'm sorry, I know you've got plenty of work in your own county, but could you send somebody down to investigate this complaint on one of my employees? It could be that they committed a crime. And so I've had that relationship with Clackamas County. We've had on a number of occasions, we've had to ask OSP, the state police, would you take a look at this one for us? And then we do that for them as well. And there's been more than one occasion where we've provided the investigator for the Oregon State Police or for the Florence Police Department or the Cottage Grove Police Department to look into complaints. So primarily that only happens when there's an allegation that there's a crime occurring. And then if there's an allegation that would make it look like if the person sending me the complaint is expressing some distrust in us as an office, like in our system, then I might ask for a third party to do it to try and reassure this complainant. I'm not going to try to hide anything. And here's how I'll demonstrate that. I'll ask a different agency to do this. So there are case-by-case examples, but by and large, we do an internal investigation. Most of them can be done internally. And then I'm happy to have conversations with folks about our disciplinary process. One of the things I've been asked recently is about use of force. And what are our policies about use of force? Do we discipline deputies who use inappropriate force? Do we discipline deputies who fail to intervene? And the answer to all that is yes, we do. And I can actually show a disciplinary history where we have disciplined deputies for failing to intervene with a third deputy's unacceptable use of force. I've actually disciplined command staff members, a captain and a lieutenant, for failing to intervene. So we do those things. The folks who work here primarily are just really terrific, internally driven to serve their community, great people. But we employ people, and people are flawed. And so occasionally we are required to investigate and tell somebody, you can't be part of this office anymore. And I'm the first person to say, if somebody is acting outside of what I want as the sheriff, and they're representing me in a way that I don't want to be represented, I'm the first to want that representation in my office. And so I'm not going to try to cover something up. I am so proud of the culture of this organization, and it's really important to me that we maintain it. And you don't get to maintain a terrific culture if you allow things to go on within the organization that shouldn't happen. So
now, does the organization Cahoots, do they interact with the Lane County Deputy Sheriff's Office?
Only just a little bit of history on that. So I'll go back to when I was a patrol deputy, and folks may or may not know that the North River Road area is sort of like a patchwork quilt between what's in the city of Eugene and what isn't in the city of Eugene. And so if there's a call for service out there that's just outside the city of Eugene, it's a deputy sheriff who goes to that. And so I had experience as a deputy sheriff to go out there and say, oh, is there any chance Cahoots would come out and deal with this? And the answer is no. And the answer is no because Cahoots was paid for by City of Eugene residents. It was a city tax that funded it. And it wasn't fair to the city folks who were funding it to send it outside of the city. More recently, and for several years now, Lane County has funded a Cahoots van over in Springfield. And they do that through a grant, but it is county funding. And so that Cahoots van, if we're on Hayden Bridge and we're just outside the city limits of Eugene and a Cahoots response would be beneficial, we can call Springfield PD and say, hey, can the Cahoots van come deal with this? And if they're available to do so, they will. So we do have a little interaction there with Cahoots, but by and large, Cahoots has been a city resource because it's been city funded. We're currently doing a project with, again, Lane County Health and Human Services has funded, and we're calling it the Western Lane MCR, which is Mobile Crisis Response. And it's a partnership with the Florence Police Department, the Siuslaw Valley Fire and Rescue, and they have employed some mobile crisis response workers there at the fire department. And the program's actually been up and running for a full year within the city of Florence. And I can tell you, I talked to Tom Turner, and it's fantastic for him that if someone is at the McDonald's there in Florence and they're causing a disruption to McDonald's, so McDonald's has called and said, hey, this person's disrupting our business, but the person's suffering, from some mental health issues or maybe some substance abuse issues, they'll send the mobile crisis response worker there. And so the police department loves the fact that rather than tying up a police officer for that, there's this other resource. What we're trying to do is figure out, okay, this is county funded. How do we grow that outside the city limits of Florence? And the difficulty we have is that you have to be able to provide for the safety of that crisis response worker. So just like Cahoots within the city of Eugene or Springfield, mobile crisis response within the city of Florence, if that situation turns dangerous or violent, a police officer can be there real quick because they're operating within, again, the smaller geographical footprint of the city. If that resource is in Triangle Lake, or if that resource is in Swissholm or Deadwood, and it turns dangerous or violent, I'm lucky if I can get a deputy there in a half hour. It's probably going to take longer, even if they're driving with lights and siren. And so how do we deploy that resource out in the county, but also provide for their safety? And so we've been in a number of meetings trying to sort that out. What we're doing currently is if the sheriff's office receives a call that's in that West Lane County and maybe a crisis response would be beneficial, we'll call them and say, hey, here's the call. Do you think you can help? Do you think you can help by phone? Can you call this person and maybe talk to them and maybe that would resolve it? If they can and that resolves it, fantastic. If the mobile crisis response says, no, I have to go out there and talk to them in person, then we're going to try and make a plan to meet them. And so maybe we'll say, okay, we'll have a deputy meet you in Mapleton, and then you can drive up to Deadwood together. The dilemma that we know we're going to have, because we already have it all the time with DHS child welfare workers. Oftentimes, child welfare workers will need to go out to a location in the county, and it's a location that they know is dangerous to them. And so they'll want a deputy to go with them. And we want to go with them and provide for their safety. The problem is 3 deputies, 4,600 square miles. So what we'll tell them is, okay, we'll have a deputy meet you and you can drive together. And they'll sit and wait, and they'll sit and wait. And we'll call them and say, okay, we've got a deputy on the way, should be there in 20 minutes. And then we might call them back and say, we just had this domestic dispute call come in. We had to divert the deputy to that. We'll call you as soon as we have somebody available. And then an hour will go by and we'll call them and say, okay, we've got a deputy available. They're coming from Cottage Grove though, so it's going to take a little while. So you can see how frustrating that is today for child welfare workers that are trying to do their work, but they can't go do it without us. And there's not enough of us. It's going to be frustrating for these mobile crisis response workers too. And so we're just going to have to work. We're going to do the best we can with what we have. And we're going to try to see how we can provide that response. I actually have a great example. Just last week, we had a situation where a woman called 911. Her son was threatening to kill her. And this is an individual that we have some history with because they have some mental health issues. And sometimes they do get violent towards mom. And this was out east of Cottage Grove. We also had Lane County Behavioral Health had said, hey, we really need this person to come. We need you to go get this person and bring him to the hospital. They used something called a director's hold, which has some legal ability to physically remove somebody and take them to the hospital for mental health issues. We had 2 deputies up there for 7 hours.
Wow.
Trying to coax this individual out of his, he lives in an outbuilding RV sort of thing. we picked up this individual, we picked up their mental health caseworker, and we drove them out there to try and help. And we had the shift sergeant who went and bought a burrito at Taco Bell and took it up there to try and convince him to come out for a burrito. Took us 7 hours. Eventually, he did volunteer to come out. He actually asked the deputies to help him out. He wanted to come out of a window, but he opened the window and asked the deputies to hold on to him and help him out. So it was a successful resolution. But 2 of my 3 deputies were up there for 7 hours. Imagine all the calls for service that came in during those 7 hours, and we had no resource to send. We ended up having to call people in to try and continue to handle calls for service. So when we talk about cahoots, we would love to have access to that sort of resource. We have to be able to provide for their safety, and right now we just don't have enough deputies to do that very efficiently.
It's all a really very large, complex, not just a large, complex financial issue, it's a large, complex social issue. It's a greater community demands, requirements. It's all really very, very, very demanding for your organization, cahoots, citizens, county officials, city officials. I've been listening to all of these presentations of people trying to provide services, and there's just so much, there's only so much that can be done. Well, Chief, Sheriff, I'd like to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for, hope we can talk again very soon. There's so much to say, so much to learn, but thank you for being willing to serve as our sheriff. Thank you for willing to keep yourself in this part of the legal law enforcement process. You have a lot of years of history and experience that I'm sure are beneficial not only to the community, but to your staff as a whole. And so thank you for all that you've done and all that you're doing, and our best to you, your staff, as well as all the line officers that are working very hard to do their job. Have a very good day, and we'll look forward to talking with you very soon. But before I say goodbye, any final comments you'd like to say to the residents of Lane County about what we're dealing with now and your commitment to them?
Yeah, I would just let folks know that we are an organization whose mission is to conserve the peace, and we're honored to serve. And I am convinced that the folks at the Lane County Sheriff's Office are internally motivated to serve their community. I'm so thankful for them. I'm thankful that they come to serve through internal motivation, because I can't get people to do that kind of work if they weren't internally motivated to serve their community. And so we've got terrific folks here. We are human, and sometimes we make mistakes, but we've got terrific folks here that are working hard. I'm happy as your sheriff to take questions or have interaction. We've put up frequently asked questions on our website, both related to the COVID pandemic, and then more recently we just put up a page related to police use of force and sort of what is being discussed across the nation and what is true of Lane County, Oregon, Lane County Sheriff's Office. And so I'd encourage you to check out those frequently asked questions if you have some questions about what is true about the Lane County Sheriff's Office related to those topics. And if you don't get what you need out of those frequently asked questions, you can find my email easily on our website. You can shoot me an email and we'll follow up.
All right, very good. And I can attest to the fact that you do respond quickly, and I sincerely appreciate that. Well, have a good day, stay safe, and we'll look forward to talking to you again real soon, sir.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Take
Yes,
care.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.